So when we first got the prompt word of boundaries for this work, I have to admit I wasn't hugely inspired because I work with boundaries a lot in my day-to-day practice and in my day-to-day life. And I wasn't sure how I was going to push that word beyond my disciplinarity. So I just sort of sat and stared at it for a really long time. And eventually I saw this. Our bodies are boundaries, like a hidden message in the word. Um, and once I'd seen it, I couldn't unsee it. So then I tried really hard to unsee it. And that led me down another path of thinking about other ways I can engage with this word boundaries. What are my boundaries? Where do they come from? Who put them there? Are they mine? What is my relationship to them? Are they the same as they always were? And I just asked myself loads and loads of questions. So in order to try and make sense of that, I just wrote down all of my thoughts, completely unfiltered, unedited thoughts, in a notebook. And I started kind of mind mapping, and I did a load of free writing. And once I felt like I had purged all the potential ideas out of my brain, I put it away for a couple of days. And then I looked back over it a few days later in order to try and sort of pick out some of the most commonly occurring themes in the hope that it would let me take the next step in my creative process. I landed very quickly on the idea that I needed to oppose my puppetry work, which is based in movement, with something that was going to be still. I also thought a lot about the practice of kin and how integrated community work is within my practice. So the practice of kin is the principle of directly including your community participants, artists or audiences within the creative process. And it comes from our company mission statement, and it's a really embedded part of my practice. So my question to myself throughout this project was, does this element of community practice still exist beyond my disciplinarity? Because this project has no real audience, at least not in a theatrical sense of one. There's no participants to consider, it's just me. There's no funders or remits, and there's no creative collaborators. So that felt very strange to me. It was slightly unnerving to kind of feel a bit on my own with it. But it's also kind of liberating too. So I looked to my very supportive university peers, and we asked lots of questions and had lots of discussions about these projects. I chatted to my mum about it, and I spoke to my teammates as well. My peers all agreed that I should focus on developing my own artistic practice because my usual focus is on group work, and they felt that going solo would push me beyond my comfort zone, and I agreed with them. My mum shared my initial hesitations about the brief and said it would be lovely to just see me doing something different, but that my options were clearly going to be limited by the fact that I was housebound at the time. And my workmates, who were mostly puppeteers, told me that I should give my producer's brain some time off, let myself just be an artist for a bit, stop worrying about project management stuff and all the boundaries that come from there, and make something I definitely cannot turn into a puppet. Which I thought they were all fair points, so I took all of them on board. I started looking online for inspiration because I knew I couldn't escape my house at that point in time. I knew I wasn't going to get to go out to do fun workshops and stuff. So I started Googling sort of still and calm art forms because I felt that was what opposed puppetry and my usual skill sets the most. So I started looking at sculptural things, and I very quickly came across Pal Tiya and the work of Kim Beaton, who is one of the artists who invented it. And I was really drawn to Kim's sculptural work. Her large-scale sculptures are just really phenomenal, very impressive pieces of artwork. Her tutorials on her website are just fantastic. I couldn't have found myself a better resource, I don't think, to learn from. And the fact that she used sculpture as both an independent sort of individual practice and a community one really spoke to me. So I was completely sold on this material immediately. Then I started looking at the risks and challenges. The first one, obviously, classic overthinking, it's just what I do. And then came sort of all the health related stuff. So my energy management, interruptions due to needing to pace to cope with that, my current broken leg and like chronic health stuff. The fact I was working to a deadline was very scary to me, and mitigating like my pain and insomnia. The rewards I wanted to find were a sense of calm, enjoyment, happiness, new ideas and inspirations, also the freedom to express myself, and just adding a greater level of artistic diversity to my practice. So I hope that's what doing a sculpture might give me. Then I started the creative bit. I explored working with this magical sculpting medium called Pal Tiya. And Pal Tiya comes as a powder and fibre mix. You mix it with cold water, and you knead it into a cookie dough-like state. This was probably the first real challenge that I came across because I suffer from tendonitis and cramping in my hands, and so this I found quite difficult actually. I had to do it in lots of small batches. Then you create a tinfoil armature base. I thought this was going to be the easy bit, but it wasn't. Then you apply the first thin coat of called a scratch coat of Pal Tiya, and you texture it to make sure that the future layer of clay will stick, and you wrap it in plastic and leave it to cure overnight. The next day you can start building up your clay to layers of 3 to 5 millimeters and just keep adding desired layers of clay, as much detail as you want. And every time you sort of finish working on it, you wrap it in plastic again and leave it to cure. You have to wait for 24 very long hours with it wrapped in plastic because retaining the moisture in the cure is really important. And on day 2, you have to add a damp cloth to recover it, and you have to leave it for 5 whole days. So during those 5 days, I started to experiment with colours and using the recommended techniques for that, which were acrylic paints and Indian inks. Then I stupidly decided to work with metal mesh, which I really hate, but I really wanted to give the wings some structural stability. And I started adding details, creating details with cosclay and adding milliput for finer details, because I did find that the Pal Tiya wasn't that great at doing finer details on this scale. Then I made the brave decision to decide to artistically expose some of the process and create this sort of visually damaged aesthetic. And I also decided that I wanted this piece to become a bird table. I don't really know why I decided on a bird table. It just felt like the right thing to do at the time. And I know I was pushing my luck a little bit, but I really wanted it to become something I could put in my garden later. And once I had made the base, I set about painting the dragon, which was already cured by this stage. And there's 3 layers that I took on the detailing of the paint. I probably would have done 1 more if I'd have had a bit more time. But at this point, I was starting to get concerned. Another thing that I really wanted to kind of test my capacity for during this project was my ability to both do the work and document it on my own. So I employed a few kind of micro documentation techniques. So I've got some time-lapse footage here that was shot at various stages of my sculpting process for you to look at while I talk about my reflections. So the big question is, what impact will this have on my future practice? And there's lots of different things that I think might influence my future practice that have come out of this. So I made a list of them. So I'm just going to talk you through my list. The first thing is that I just want to be aware that even though the world of puppetry is completely full of new techniques and you can never ever run out of new things to learn in this field, it is important for me also to look outside of the world of puppetry, because there's lots of skills and points of interest from outside of this sector that I could bring in. And there's also lots of things from the world of puppetry that I might be able to share outwards. And that's quite interesting to me. The thing that this project has reminded me to be is just to allow myself to be more curious as an artist, and let myself be surprised when I try new things, and kind of not fall into the trap of clipping my own wings because I think something's going to be too inaccessible, or that it's just going to be too much for my body to handle. That's quite a big one, I think, as a disabled artist, because you know that everything that you do comes with a massive helping of payback and a rise in symptoms. But you have to keep trying new things, but you don't know what impact they're going to have till you try them. And that can make you maybe overcautious sometimes. The next thing that I learned mostly came from feedback I got from my peers, which was about me just giving myself permission to be an artist and not always let my sort of project management and facilitation brains take over. Letting myself have that creative space, I think, is really important for me to keep more connected to that. I also want to continue to look for slightly more sort of tranquil and calm creative activities. I think that helps me personally when I'm trying to do anything that requires like neuroregulation and sort of dealing with my central nervous system, which is quite unpredictable and over responsive at times. So one of the things that sort of working on a sculpture has done is kind of made me slow down and focus in a little bit more. And I think there's something in that to be explored, because usually the work that I do is in a very busy, chaotic, sort of creatively energized space with a lot of people. So I think there's something about being able to take a calmer, more tranquil, more mindful process into some of the settings that I work in, or maybe finding new settings to work in. And I think that also connects with something that I've been sensing a lot of in my professional work recently, which is if you're working with chronically ill children, they want you to be making work that raises awareness about chronic illness. And for me personally, that gets a bit tiresome. And for my community, that gets a bit frustrating, because sometimes all you want is creative escapism. And there is a real inherent value, I think, in not having to focus on the fact that you're ill and just taking your mind away from that, giving your body something else to do that isn't maybe intensive physiotherapy, but can help with developing dexterity, aiding mobility in your hands. There's just so many different health benefits to being able to create in whatever form that takes. And I think it's okay for us to say no just because we're disabled. Like, doesn't mean we have to make work about being disabled all the time. So I'm going to advocate a lot more for that in my practice moving forward, I think.